Hi, and welcome to Morning Coffee with the Zahn Academy. I'm Deanna, and it's Great Books Monday. In June 2020, our country is going through a lot of reflection right now, but there are lessons that we can learn from the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was a former slave who taught himself how to read and write. His accomplishments are numerous, but mainly he was a great speaker, an orator. He fought against slavery. He befriended Abraham Lincoln, and he helped get the legislation passed to abolish slavery in America. He had his own newspaper. He traveled Europe and gave speeches against slavery and talked about his own enslavement as a way to really get people to understand the horrors that he went through and what all slaves were going through. But the lesson I want to focus on that we can learn from Frederick Douglass are the books that he read. Now, when he was a young boy, he had a mother who was a slave. He didn't know who his father was, and he was taken from his family and sent to Baltimore to become a slave for a family. They had a young son, and the mother would teach Frederick along with her son on how to read. They were about the same age. The master of the house told his wife not to teach Frederick to read, and after this point, her attitude towards him changed, and he notes this in his first autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. And he talks about this change in her, but that innate need and feeling and drive for him to become educated, the seed had been planted. And so he taught himself how to read. He even taught himself how to write. And the first book that he bought himself, he was a young boy and he earned some extra money that he could keep by polishing boots. So he took 50 cents and purchased the book, The Columbian Orator. Now, this book was a popular book that was taught in schools. It was published in the late 1700s, and by the 1820s, it was still very popular and very widespread as a school book, and it contained speeches. In this book, Frederick Douglass started learning the moral case against slavery, and it was something that really changed his life. And he figured out that being educated and reading and being learned were things that he needed to accomplish in order to change the path, the direction in which he was going to go. Throughout his life, he continued to read books. He built up quite a bit of a library, and he's known for saying that he was never finished learning, that you don't have to go to college in order to learn. All you need to do are to read these great books. So let's take a look at the particular books that really influenced this great man that was remarkable in his ability to speak, in his ability to think, and his ability to write, and ultimately change history. Frederick Douglass escaped. He was about 20 years old, and when he ended up in Massachusetts, he changed his name from Bailey, his given name, to Douglass. And this name was based on a character from Sir Walter Scott's A Lady in the Lake. So he was already very familiar with a lot of literature. He read everything he could get his hands on. In Massachusetts, he was newly married to the woman that helped him escape, and he started to subscribe to The Liberator, which is William Lloyd Garrison's paper for the abolitionist movement. And he didn't have a lot of money, but that was one of the first luxuries that he afforded himself, was a paper, a subscription in order to read. Later in life, Frederick Douglass has his own paper called the North Star, and in this paper, he publishes the chapters from Charles Dickens's Bleak House. And so literature was something that he always cared about. In fact, when he was on a speaking tour in Europe, he went to Scotland, and he was such a fan of Robert Burns and the story of Robert Burns of coming up and being just a farmer and writing in the vernacular of the Scottish language, and people looking down on him because he was just this poor, uneducated man trying to write poetry. He really connected with that. And he notes in his autobiography about being in Scotland and what it's like to walk in the same footsteps of Robert Burns and how just overpowered with emotion he was. And this is how people today feel about him, going to these places where he walked and trying to imagine what his experience was. So he had such an appreciation of classic literature. Now, as he moved on through life, he ended up moving to Washington, D.C. because he was there so often. His sons had moved there, and we know what he had in his library, and it was very extensive. In his famous 4th of July speech delivered on July 5th, 1852, he quotes from Shakespeare. He brings in the line from Julius Caesar that's said by Mark Antony in a soliloquy, "Friends, Romans, countrymen." And he quotes more from that speech. "The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones." There are so many other examples. Frederick Douglass was familiar with Alfred Lord Tennyson, the great British poet. He read William Makepeace Thackeray. He was familiar with Thomas Carlyle, all of these literary greats. He became friends with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one of the leaders of the suffragette movement. He was friends with Harriet Beecher Stowe, who's most known for writing Uncle Tom's Cabin. And these figures, they would have discussed literature, they would have spoken in the same language, and they would have really influenced each other. What we can learn from all of this are the books that he read, and we can read these same works. We can look into his character through reading these books that had such an influence and impact on him, and we can work to emulate him by learning the same lessons, by understanding the same words that he read that really changed his life. We can't experience the horrors that he went through, but we can have access to the same books that he read, and we can strive to develop the same type of moral character that Frederick Douglass had. He is an exemplar. He is someone to look up to, and he is someone to want to emulate. Thanks for watching. I'm going to put a list of some of the books that Frederick Douglass read in the description below with links to find them free online through Project Gutenberg. You can also check out links to our other social media, and make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. We'll see you next time.